Hi everyone, you're listening to a podcast about self-help using memes. I'm your host, Blake Moore. On today's podcast, how do you know what you know? What knowledge should we trust? How do we break ties? Thankfully, there's already a word for that endeavor. It's called epistemology. I know it sounds scary if you've never heard about it, but you're doing it every day even if you don't mean to. So my goal here is to figure out how to let you do that on purpose. Let's get into it. As a reminder, this is a podcast about self-help using memes. And so for the very first few episodes of it, I'm going to sort of assume not everybody's listened to everything yet. If you have, I really appreciate it. But if you're just skipping around, I want to make sure people aren't lost. And so since meme is in the title, I want to at the very least kind of re-emphasize what I mean by that. If you would like a clearer definition of what I mean when I say meme, I'm talking about that in a social science sense. I've actually recorded an episode of the podcast where I kind of lay out what I mean when I say the word meme. So if I use that word, or if you feel like there's not enough of that in the podcast, I kind of laid out where that is throughout, as well as have a specific place for it. So when I say meme, for this purposes, I mean any general big concept like cowboy hats, right? Cowboy hats are their own really big thing, but there are also specific kinds of cowboy hats. And the way that I know this is because I love comedy, and so Norm Macdonald in Saturday Night Live, I remember when he dressed up as, he dressed up as Burt Reynolds, but it was Norm Macdonald dressed as Burt Reynolds, and he had just this gigantic foam cowboy hat, and the fact that clearly wouldn't work at a rodeo, right? If you could picture like a very serious cowboy wearing Norm Macdonald's giant foam cowboy hat while trying to ride a bull, right? Like not all cowboy hats are the same meme, and so they very clearly have different uses in different places and different relationships. I mean, there were even cowboy hats in the Golden Girls earlier when my wife was watching it. So cowboy hats are everywhere, but the point is cowboy hats are a meme, and cute cowboy hats are a meme, and foam cowboy hats are a meme, right? All the different varieties of different things are all memes. And so when I talk about things like knowledge itself is a meme. The way we know knowledge is a meme. And so memes are just really, really broad concepts as far as we're talking about them here. So what does that word mean? It's kind of a $20 word, epistemologist, a fancy word. In truth, I thought about epistemology for a really long time before I understood that was the name for the meme that I was kind of poking around the edges of understanding. I think you probably have two, but with a different vocabulary. So let's begin at the beginning. What do I mean by epistemology, and how does that relate to the title of the podcast? What do you know? How do you know what you know, right? Epistemology, as you might gather from that context, to me means the process by which we know the world. To me, epistemology is the toolbox of questions and thought exercises that we can and should use to think about the answers to questions like, how do we or should we judge what knowledge is true? Or if I have multiple sources of conflicting information, how do I decide which one to go with? I also kind of think of it as like the art or science of trying to figure out what to do when knowledge conflicts, right? Like you have two sources of knowledge. How do you pick between that? The act of spending time to think about how to do that the right way is kind of like peak epistemology for me, but I understand not everybody has their own personal definition of epistemology. For a more literal take on it, like if you were to Google it or look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary, epistemology is defined as the theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity, and scope. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. And so that very last part of it's pretty important too. Epistemology is how we decide between what is something we are justified in believing versus what is just an opinion. And know that nowhere in there says fact. We'll actually get into the definition of what facts mean or think about, at least as a concept. I don't plan on reading you a definition of fact, but notice that the actual definition of epistemology never uses the word fact. It says it distinguishes between justified belief and opinion. So even epistemology should provide the tools for us to decide between two competing opinions, even when it's just not as simple as saying, well, mine's a fact and yours an opinion, so you should go with mine. I don't disagree with the Oxford English Dictionary definition. It's just not my connection point to that meme. So I don't want to start off your understanding about topic with it. Again, to me, epistemology is way simpler than that. It's just the process by which we know the world, right? How do we take new information in? How that sort of thing. How do we have knowledge? And since, as far as podcasts are concerned, we're kind of in the same roller coaster cart, I'd like to keep you here with me in my definition instead of, with the Oxford English Dictionary's one. So why should we care? Epistemology is actually, to me, it's cool, clearly, right? Different people pick different stuff to talk about, but I like epistemology. But more importantly, it's a primary part of how we're going to talk about the rest of the content in this podcast, because when you view things as memes, right, if the world's just a big set of memes that relate to each other in a bunch of different ways, you have to understand epistemology, because it's literally the study of how we decide which memes to trust or which memes go with which other memes, or when two memes conflict, how we pick between them. And so the study of epistemology can really be the study of competing knowledge, or what we should trust, or how we make good choices. And so while I think it's important to just talk about as a concept, specifically for the rest of this podcast, I would like to answer questions like, how do I know if I'm acting the right way? Right? I would love to try to answer that question, and I plan on it. But the very first half of that question is, how do I know? Which is why this podcast is literally discussing the process of knowledge. I will and intend to record the second half of that. How do I know if I'm making the right choices? But to understand how we know if we're making the right choices, we have to understand how we know. And so here we are talking about epistemology. I do want to talk for a minute about admitting fault, which is honestly something that I find very hard to do. For me, the hardest part of admitting fault is realizing that I'm wrong. Once I can contextualize why I am wrong or at fault, apologizing is actually very easy for me. Admitting that I am sorry that I have done something wrong is not a hard act, but getting me to acknowledge that I was wrong in the first place is often the most difficult thing. And so I want to talk about admitting fault, because a key portion of what I want to discuss is how we get knowledge, right? And so that might seem like it's easy enough to just sort of evaluate as, once I get new knowledge, how do I decide which parts of that I trust? And that's true. That's absolutely half of epistemology. But the other half of it is, and I think you know this, you have knowledge in your head already before you ever sat down or jogging or whatever you're doing to listen to this podcast. You came into it with some sort of knowledge before we ever talked. I have knowledge in my head right now, right? The point is that you already have knowledge in your head. And so while it's important to work through how you intake new knowledge, it's just as important to clean out the old knowledge. And so that often comes through the form of saying, I used to think something else, and now I think this. And it's honestly just at its core admitting fault. I think we all know at least someone in our life who will just never admit fault. And so the fact that those people exist mean when we have a conversation about how we know knowledge and how we have epistemology, and again, I don't think I've talked about it yet this episode, but I'm going to use words throughout the podcast like conversation or discussion or argument, and I really do mean it that way. Anybody that would like to talk to me about their opinion on these subjects or share them with the other listeners of the podcast, there's information to do that in my link in Spotify or in Twitter, but basically there's a subreddit called self-help using memes. If you don't know how to use Reddit, there's guides on the internet talking about it. But the point is, this should be a conversation between anybody that's interested in it. And that process only works if people are willing to admit when they are wrong. Because if you're trying to build a set of knowledge, you have to be willing to let go of old knowledge. And sometimes that can be hard to do. But it sounds a lot like this. When something comes up that you don't know how to deal with, it sounds like, I don't know, let's research it, not do it this way because I said so. That's generally a good way to tell whether someone's applying any level of epistemology. So with the rest of the time we've got, and honestly, so we've talked about epistemology as a theory, and that's cool, like zoomed out dictionary definition, what it means to me, right? We've discussed epistemology and why it might be important, and that's cool as a concept, but I pride myself in trying to think of metaphors or examples or ways of explaining things that might contextualize what I'm saying in a way that makes it easier to remember later or to talk to somebody else. And so I think one of the best examples that I've got to talk about epistemology is just about getting my car fixed. Any car repair I have ever had. I assume some of you out there have also driven cars and needed to get them fixed. If you haven't, I'm sorry, but imagine any time anyone has ever had a car break. So my car has just magically quit working in this thought exercise, right? I don't really know what's wrong with it. I just know it's not working the way it's supposed to work. I have a very basic understanding of automotive repair, much beyond like, does it have gas? Did it get oil changed back when I was supposed to? Oh, that tire looks really flat, right? Like I've got that level of work on cars, but I definitely cannot like open the hood up and tell you what's wrong with it. So in this hypothetical example, my car's broke. And in real life, I also don't know. That part wasn't hypothetical. That's my actual level of car knowledge. My car doesn't work. How do I get that fixed? It might not seem like it, but this is actually a practical exercise in epistemology, and I will walk you through it. So my steps in order for trying to get my car fixed are this. Number one, is this something that I know how to fix? Like I said, I do not know very much about how to fix cars. So very likely, I do not know. It's not my own personal knowledge, right? I can't go fix the car. So the second thing is this something the people I know and trust can tell me about it? Like, are you fortunate enough to have like a member of your family who knows how to work on cars, or your best friend is a mechanic, or your wife's really good at cars, right? Well, whatever. The point is, do you know someone you trust locally in your life who can help you with that problem? And so for the purposes of my example, no, I don't. I can't fix my car. My wife can't fix my car. And so we go to my third level of knowledge. Is this something I can find an expert in to tell me about, since I don't know enough to make that happen myself? And for the purposes of this example, yeah, I mean, experts totally exist. That's like a mechanic or something to that effect, like a shop that works on cars. But let's not pretend for a second that mechanics are the only expression of expertise when it comes to fixing cars, right? Because if expertise is a meme, there's a lot of ways you can gain expertise, right? If my car breaks, I could Google it. I could try to look it up. There are some awesome YouTube channels about how to fix everything around cars. I don't know a lot about cars, so I don't want to plug a channel that's maybe just putting stuff up that's not accurate. I don't know. But like, if you want to know how to fix cars, the point is that stuff's on YouTube more or less. You might find some good ones and you might find some bad ones, but there's definitely people on YouTube trying to take their car expertise and give it to you. The other way you could gain expertise in that is just available resources like auto repair manuals. Like you can become your own expert if you really want, right? Like you could go learn in an apprenticeship. You could go to a trade school. I mean, yeah, they cost money, but the point is, if you really wanted expertise, you could spend 2 years to go learn how to, or however long it takes to become a mechanic. I don't actually know. I'm making that up. I'm not trying to be insulting, but you could take the amount of time it takes to turn into a mechanic and do that yourself, but your car's going to sit broke in your driveway while it happens. And so the way our society is set up is, if you don't have expertise, you go get that expertise from somebody else. But see what I just did there? That's just epistemology applied to auto repair. I've got a problem, my car won't stay running or won't start, and I don't know how to solve that with my current skill set. I start with what I know, what my own personal knowledge is, which for cars is not very much. I try to expand to what people I know and trust know, again, still not very much in my household. And so I'm left just to appeal to experts, which can be bad, right? Like, you could find dishonest mechanics, you could find expensive mechanics, you could find mechanics that don't know what they're doing. You could get a mechanic on their first day who like drives your car into that hole in the ground at Walmart, right? There's a billion things that could go wrong. But the point is, at some point, if it is beyond your skill set, you have to engage experts, even if they're dishonest or too expensive. Those are like sort of the dice you roll. I will also say personally, I love my automotive repair place. So if you know who you are, big ups. If you don't, that's fine. I like you just the same. But this is not to hate on dishonest mechanics or anything like that. My point is, you were forced into that situation because you were not an expert. And that's the way of gathering knowledge, right? You know what you know what the people that you trust know. And then after that, you're kind of left to figure out what you think you should do. And that's why I think epistemology is so important, because again, part of epistemology is trying to decide how you break ties between types of information that are the same. And so if I have two experts claiming to both be experts, epistemology is how you break that tie. It's the process of gaining knowledge. Which of these things should I trust? Which one is the better choice? How do I know that that information's better? And then you probably actually get into some stuff that you already know. You do research, you read Yelp reviews, you ask your friends, right? You can gain expertise in those things, but it requires effort to supplement. And so epistemology can be very important like that, but it's important to understand that it flavors everything that you do because it informs all of the knowledge that you use. So in summary, I appreciate you sticking it out with me for epistemology. I know that's a big word, but I hope it's no longer a scary one to you. It definitely doesn't need to be. You're actually doing it automatically or without thinking about it, right? You have to gain knowledge. And so from a mindfulness perspective or from a self-improvement perspective, try to do that actively. Take ownership of the new thoughts that you decide to internalize and act on and make them good ones. You're going to follow advice, whether it's good advice or bad advice. So try to make it good advice. Epistemology is the tool that you can use to do that with. I'm just asking you to think about how you gain knowledge purposefully and with diligence to make sure that it is the kind of knowledge you want. When you do that, we can point out to each other where we're wrong, but it lets us have a shared vocabulary with. So there's a lot more to come on this topic and topics like it. I very much appreciate everybody that's taking the time to listen, and I'll be back next time with more information for you all. This has been a podcast about self-help using memes. Thanks for listening.